Social institutions are important tenets of a human existence. Social institutions are important structural elements that govern behavior in various spheres of social life. In any wide society, 5 major institutions are always present. These are the family, politics, education, religion and economics. We have already examined the family and religion as important social institutions within our society. All social institutions are interrelated in a number of ways. For instance, schools need funds, politics needs education and religion needs education and family, while the family needs all of the aforementioned institutions. What is the main purpose of social institutions? Sociologist over the years has been of the view that social institution changes aspects of an individual's life. It is believed that social institutions play an important role in the social stratification of any society. It is also believed that social institutions foster a continuation of cultural activities and socialization of new members of a society. The sociological theories, functionalism, conflict consensus, feminist and interactionism, have influenced education as a sociological institution, with each of them influencing both the individual and the society's view, hence creating a social change in the education. This paper will delve into education as a social institution. This paper focuses on education in Jamaica. Education in Jamaica mirrors education throughout the Caribbean. Jamaica, along with most if not all Caribbean countries, shares a common education history. It is a difficult task to discuss education in Jamaica, without a historical framework of Jamaica's education system. Throughout the years, based on recorded information, an education system existed in Jamaica. During the earlier years of Jamaica's civilization, although primitive when compared to present-day civilization, education was a priority. Several anecdotal suggests the norms and values observed during the Spanish early years within the Caribbean region points to a sophisticated and organized society prior to the Spanish colonization of the Caribbean. Regardless of this notable finding, the education system which existed in Europe was considered as superior to that which was found in the newly discovered Western societies. Western civilization prior to European colonization education system was considered informal in structure and regularity. The Indians during their earlier civilization taught themselves means of survival. Farming, fishing, cooking and art was of particular importance. Within the logs of Christopher Columbus, a description of the Tainos suggested a society existed from creative means of living. In an effort to conquer the Tainos, the Spaniards killed many of the males and raped the females. Some surviving Tainos ended up being slaves for these pirates. In 1655 the Spaniards sighted a large fleet of what looked like enemy ships sailing towards Jamaica. The Spaniards, on seeing these ships, released their slaves including a few Tainos and fled on their small boats to neighboring Cuba. The slaves were now freed and fled to the mountains which would later become their home for decades to come, the Maroons. It is these free slaves originated the concept of mountain people and Maroons, which later gave the British a hard time. Throughout all the logs and notes on this period of Jamaica's history, no proof have been unearthed which would suggest that the Spanish attempted to educate their slaves during their tenure as plantation masters on their large plantation estate. Slaves were only allowed food for survival and tools for work. This trend followed in the British rule of the British West Indies for nearly 200 to 300 years. The triangular slave trade became popular in the late 1600s. Slave traders caught and sold Africans as Africa during incited tribal disputes. These prisoners of war were sold to European merchants. African slaves were stacked on ships like paper on the shelves of a book stand. These casualties of war were shipped to the Caribbean, where they were sold to plantation owners whom deprived them of scholastic attainment. It was nearly impossible for slaves to be educated. At some point in our history the plantation owners used the Bible as a tool to make slaves submissive. They suggested that slaves should obey their masters. While on the plantation, slaves were prohibited from being educated. It was the expectation of the white plantation owner, supported by the overseer, that they, the slaves, use their strength and skill learned to plant and reap several acres of agricultural produce. Throughout many slave plantations across Jamaica and the Caribbean, rested the willpower of many slaves to educate their offspring about their cultural traditions. Many slaves used the method of storytelling, singing and dancing as a means of informally educating the masses. To the plantation owners and overseer whom watched their every move, the dancing and singing was considered an entertainment. Not knowing that this mode of cultural retention was a means of informing the young slave of their past. Education for slaves. The closest a slave would get to be instructed like if they were in an actual classroom would be the few minutes they are given simple instructions by the overseer of the plantation about their task within the field. It was the belief of the European that the best way to maintain power over the slaves would be deprive them of education. Slaves were prohibited regardless of the age of the slave, from being educated. This was indeed a dilemma for slaves throughout the Caribbean. During this dilemma for the slaves, the children of the Europeans including the planter's child were sent to England to be educated. It was the hope of the plantocracy class of Jamaica that this would serve to maintain a class system which existed within the Caribbean system. This class system saw slaves at the bottom of the social ladder. The children of the planters after they received their education in England would be given the task of managing their parents' interests throughout the Caribbean. Schools were acknowledged as a social institution during early civilization. The education of our colonizers meant a continuation of the system of slavery for several years throughout the Caribbean. The social institution referred to as education is comprised of the school system, and it is in the school system where knowledge and skills are developed along with cultural and social values and norms. The value of slavery and the intellectuality needed to maintain the system was of importance to all plantation owners during slavery. Additionally, through the school system culture and society continue and further those social values and norms, thus fulfilling a need prescribed by society. This thrust towards education as a tool of social acculturalization has not changed throughout the years. Education as a social institution today. Theoretical perspectives. It can be established that countries throughout the Caribbean has unique culture. The historical background of the Caribbean helps to create a framework which mirrors a common way of life throughout the Caribbean. It is believed that education throughout the Caribbean is a very important social institution. The importance of this social institution have been recognized and promoted with several educational initiatives in place today throughout the Caribbean. The establishing of the University of the West Indies, the Caribbean Examination Council and the Caribbean Maritime Institute are but a few initiatives which have highlighted the importance of education as a regional effort. The impact of education institutions on Caribbean people can be viewed in terms of both the functionalist, conflict, social interactionalist and Marxist sociological perspectives. Some theorists may believe that the education system works with other institutions in society to ensure the smooth working of society, while others believe that the dominant ideas of education are those of the elites whose children have greater access to education and continue to succeed. What are the perspectives of Karl Marx, Functionalism, Conflict and Symbolic Interactionalist? The functionalist perspective argues that education serves many important functions in society. First, it socializes children and prepares them for life in society. This is not only done by teaching book knowledge, but also teaching the society's culture, including moral values, ethics, politics, religious beliefs, habits, and norms. Second, education provides occupational training, especially in industrialized societies such as the United States. Unlike in less complex societies or in the United States prior to 1900 when most jobs and training were passed on from father to son, most jobs in the United States today require at least a high school education, and many professions require a college or postgraduate degree. The third function that education serves, according to functionalist theorists, is social control, or the regulation of deviant behavior. By requiring young people to attend school, this keeps them off the streets and out of trouble. This theoretical view differs from the symbolic interaction perspective, which focuses on experiences. The symbolic interaction view of education focuses on interactions during the schooling process and the outcomes of those interactions. For instance, interactions between students and teachers can create expectations on both parts. The teacher begins to expect certain behaviors from students, which in turn can actually create that very behavior. This is called the teacher expectancy effect. For example, if a teacher expects a poor student to perform below average on a math test when compared to middle-class students, over time the teacher may act in ways that encourage the poor students to get below average math scores. This is partly because the belief is that poor children always get poor grades. Conflict theory looks at the disintegrative and disruptive aspects of education. These theorists argue that education is unequally distributed through society and is used to separate groups, based on class, gender, or race. Educational level is therefore a mechanism for producing and reproducing inequality in our society. Educational level, according to conflict theorists, can also be used as a tool for discrimination, such as when potential employers require certain educational credentials that may or may not be important for the job. It discriminates against minorities, working-class people, and women, those who are often less educated and least likely to have credentials because of discriminatory practices within the educational system. It is from the views shared by Karl Marx that the conflict theory was formulated. Marx suggests in one of his essays that the education system which existed during his time was designed to benefit the interest of the capitalist. The capitalists were the owners of production. He argues that there are two main groups in society. These classes included the ruling class and the subjected class. Both classes had different interest. The ruling class desires to make profit while the subjected class desire to just work and survive. Based on the existence of these two classes expected to have an unequal relationship. To a great extent this described the era of slavery and during the early years of the abolition of slavery. Many sociologists would suggest that with the acceptance of capitalism throughout most of the Western Hemisphere, the class system which exists extended beyond just two groups. Unfortunately, this is not so. Throughout the Caribbean, educators are now calling on the family to take a proactive role in the education of their children, as this is crucial for their success. Many policymakers along with parents and educators are from the socialized view that children from low socioeconomic background learn differently. The wealthy citizens of our society have a standardized mechanism for their children attaining academic excellence. Their social status creates natural acceptance into varied sporting groups, organization, and the availability of special sponsorship for their children. The call for a proactive role aimed at parents is aimed primarily at the impoverished children of the inner city. Those whom have little or no opportunity to receive equitable and equal education as their middle-class counterparts. The cycle of poverty continues throughout the social stratified societies across the Caribbean. The curse of their historical past have remained with them as if there still exists a plantation system. Discipline and promotion have become socially stratified within this modernized capitalist era. This reality has confirmed Marx's perspective on education, a perspective written over 100 years ago. The reality of the implication of socialization, poverty and history on education can be seen within any Jamaican educational institution today. Teachers have to be competing with community values, beliefs and customs. Students are daunted by the impoverished situation which exists within their home or community, known as the inner city of our cities. The remnants of slavery ideology and thought of little or no self-worth have influenced many students to have little or no self-worth for themselves. This has resulted in a reckless and careless attitude towards those setting charge, rules and regulations. This occurs as they become frustrated knowing they exist, in many cases, in a situation of hopelessness. Gilbert and Gugler, 1994, describe how the inner cities were created and possible factors which still encourage its existence. Gilbert and Gugler, 1994, further pointed out that the social framework of the inner city had evolved over the years. Throughout many third world countries, there has been an increase in rural-urban migration, inspiring an urban growth. This movement has encouraged the growth of inner cities communities. Migrants from rural communities migrate to the cities in search of improved social amenities. In many rural areas in many developing countries, the access to basic social amenities are usually difficult. Schooling and employment are the #1 factors influencing rural-urban migration. Many rural migrants become so motivated for change, they may opt to settle in urban slums and squatter settlements referred to as inner city. Many low economic status communities in Jamaica are born out of this eclectic movement which transpired during the early to mid-1900s, which saw the massive movement of rural laborers into urban cities. Today they are formalized and structured and are referred to as inner city communities. These communities are dependent on the capitalist for employment and educational opportunities. Inner city communities are homes to a number of poor children with limited social amenities. Lynn, 1990. These children are regarded by Gilbert and Gugler, 1994, and Payne, 1994, as disenfranchised and indisciplined. Gilbert and Gugler, 1994, highlighted that schools within the inner city are usually overcrowded and lacking spaces to accommodate the school populace. These schools are usually under-resourced and labeled as non-traditional schools. The schools found within the inner city usually have a low social status student populace. Traditional secondary schools are believed to be driven by support from policymakers, community, and other stakeholders such as the church and traditional values, belief and attitude. This support comes in the form of available resources, opportunities and teacher support. White, 1995, Burton, 1985, and Gilbert and Gugler, 1994. The quality and relevance of education throughout the Caribbean is important if we as a society is expected to improve on our economic and social situation throughout the world. Relevance and quality in education also plays an integral role in the region's economic growth agenda. Education is one of the most important social institutions without which, all the other institutions would be rendered obsolete. Apart from enlightening the masses, education plays a vital role in the existence of peace and stability in the society and promotes harmony between interrelating beings. It also promotes sound economic processes and political dispensations, meaning that without education, society would be in a state of absolute chaos. This means that the betterment of the society depends on the quality of the education that members of that society get. In addition to the quality of education in existence throughout the Caribbean, equality and equity in educational opportunity should exist. It is believed that schools throughout Jamaica as well as other Caribbean countries should be equally given the opportunity to perform at their highest level. Opportunities for students are made possible with resources. Education resources should be made available to all schools regardless of their traditional or non-traditional status. The continuation of inequity and inequality in education fosters varied social stratification within the Caribbean region. Evans, 2001, Hyman Anglin, 1994, and White, 1995. Varied social stratification encourages social issues such as crime, violence and corruption. In an effort to revolutionize education throughout the region, it is the belief of many sociologists that teachers who are poorly equipped to administer their lessons within their classrooms, students' performances within many under-resourced schools, be given adequate school, teaching and learning resources. A regional standard of education is necessary. This would encourage regional economic growth and inspire an improvement in the rate of literacy amongst the region's population. Education is a very important social institution, and should be considered as such by our region's political representatives. The academic integrity of the region's tertiary institution is dependent on how serious regional leaders embrace the school of thought that education is the #1 social institution within any society.